Hey guys, welcome to Florida Man 40k Podcast Season 2, Episode 4. As always, I'm Dan Smith, and I have with me John, Will, and Tim.
What's up?
Hello.
The utter enthusiasm is palpable, and I love it.
It's a little early for all of us, but
It's
we're happy
early.
to be here.
I'm doing
tired.
what I can, and y'all are just like, All right, so we do have quite a bit to talk about today, because I don't know if any of our listeners know or not, but the boys, not counting me, went to a GT, and I think did all right. What do y'all think?
Considering the field, I'm pretty happy with how I did.
Yeah, I guess considering who I lost
I
to,
got
I'm
no
not too upset with how I did, I guess.
I mean, considering who I lost to, I'm also happy.
I don't know. I'm pretty upset with you, John. All right. So pretty much today we're going to just talk about the Salt Classic. Is there anything else, any other topics y'all wanted to cover before we dive in, or should we just YOLO it?
Let's just YOLO.
All right. Beautiful. Well, I will, because I didn't go, the way that we'll do this is I will go through and talk to Will, and then we'll talk to Tim, and then finally, Mr. Lennon. So, just so the listeners know what's going on, if anyone has questions, obviously dive in, or any comments, go for it. But without further ado, William, Imperial Guard Taylor. Tell us first about your list.
All right, so the list that I brought to the event last weekend was 2 detachments. Both of them were battalions. The first battalion that had my warlord in it was 2 company commanders, a platoon commander, 3 plasma command teams, 2 special weapons teams with 3 plasma each, 3 normal guard squads, 1 27-man conscript squad, and then in the other battalion was 3 tank commanders, all with demo cannons, all with plasma cannon sponsons, 3 units of 5 scions, and then 2 manticores that were full payload. The infantry detachment was rapid fire at 18 inches and always counts in cover as long as they didn't advance. And the tank battalion was reroll variable shots and an extra 6 inches on heavy weapons that were 24 inches or more. The idea behind the list was using scions to get easy scramblers. A lot of people can't, screen out, these itty bitty little 5-man teams, and the infantry list was part of the list was supposed to kind of outflank the plasma teams. For 1 command point, you can have a company commander and 3 of the plasma commands come in from the side, and demo russes do what demo russes do. I also had 2 heavy flamer chimeras in the list, and those are going to play key roles in how I lost my games.
All right. So just to kind of summarize, so your meta choice, it sounds like, was uh, you're relying on kind of deploy scramblers and probably engage on all fronts because you have a lot of ways to deep strike and outflank. Did you feel you kind of followed that, or like just kind of on a macro scale, what was your game plan with the list? Obviously, you have a ton of damage output. That's one thing Guard does well. But what were some of the macro choices you made? Like, I know we had talked about those chimeras specifically, to help kind of create multiple instances of shooting on objectives. But was there anything else like that? Little tech pieces you had consideration of?
Yeah, so the chimeras were originally the list had a wyvern in it instead of the 2 chimeras, but my infantry squads were getting torn up pretty easily, and the name of the game to win is hold objectives. So I thought that putting chimeras in the list would help get my infantry squads onto objectives easier. It's true that I did want to plan to get at least 10 on engage. Engage was something I think I took every single game, every single game I took engage, and scramblers was something that I also took, I believe, every single game. I wanted easy 10 points on the secondaries. The third one kind of switched around, but typically I picked While We Stand We Fight, because Lehman Russes are still kind of hard to kill, especially if you are clever, hide them behind buildings, deploy them really deep. So those were the three secondaries that I was planning on taking almost every single game, unless something else kind of presented itself. And yeah, I mean that's basically it. Yeah, big guns do what big guns do. Little guys run out on objectives and hopefully don't die at the beginning of my next turn. And it worked 3 out of 5 games.
Obviously, like you said, you went 3-2. Part of that was because honestly, guard is limited in how they can play the missions right now. There's only like so much limit, like so much they can do. But kind of real fast, I do want to go through just like a real short summary of the 5 games, who you played against, what army they had, and then any quick takeaways. And then I kind of want to focus in on the 2 losses a little bit more after that. So if you want to just give us a quick little 5-minute quick hitter on each one, let's hear it.
Sure. So my first game I played against some new guy. His name was Nick Nanavati. I don't know. He seemed like he was playing, very recently, and he was playing Death Guard. And
I have to unmute just to. Nice. That's
Yes.
all.
Is it
all.
the worst? You like travel to go to a GT and like the first round pairings go up and you look at it, you're just like, oh.
So it's funny
mean-
that you say that because we all kind of joked in the chat, like if I get paired up against him, I have a pretty good chance of winning, as long as I don't make any mistakes. And when I
that's
saw
a
it,
great matchup for you.
yeah, when I saw it, I was like, okay, calm down. You can do this. I had to like give myself a little bit of a pep talk, but I also thought to myself, yeah, I'm not the main character, and everybody's got to lose to the winner at least once. Somebody's going to make it all the way to the end, and you could be the the first stepping stone for them to get there. So I was trying to be realistic about the matchup, but we deployed deep, or I deployed deep. It was Dawn of War. It was 6 objectives. I took engage on all fronts, which was a big mistake. I took scramblers, which I got, and then I took while we stand we fight, which would have been okay if I had not made a critical mistake at the beginning of the game, but we'll get to that a little bit later. He got the first turn, which is something I didn't want him to do, and I hung in there. But by the end of the game, I only had the 2 mana cores left, which stung a little bit, and so I lost that one. He sent me home with I think only got 50 points that game, which I guess isn't that bad.
Yeah, a 50-point loss, like, you did things. It's just the way that the tempo of the missions go, it's really hard to have a close loss unless, like, it's a knockdown drag out. And we'll get more into that game specifically because that's one I really want to break down and analyze. But yeah, 50 points against literally a professional 40k player who Lennon knows kind of well, I guess. But yeah, someone of that caliber, like honestly, I would honestly take that matchup in any like not super major just because I like to learn, and that's a great game to learn from. So again, we'll go into that a lot more. But hit us with your second and third round, and then we'll keep going.
Cool. So the second round I played against, it was a guard mirror match actually, and it was funny because this was one of the lists that I was reading. I was like, "What is going on here?" The guy had 5 chimeras, 3 demo russes, and one of those demo russes was Pask, and a Punisher Russ, a full payload Manticore, a non-full payload Basilisk, and then 6 units of 5 Scions, and then a unit of Bulgrins. So I was like really confused as to what it was going on. I talked to some of the guys that were in the store earlier that day, like kind of trying to understand what the playstyle was, and basically the gist of it was you use the chimeras, you deploy them long ways, and then you move them up and create a line, and then you put your demo russes right behind them so that they can't get touched. So, like, I kind of understand the list philosophy. I was very concerned because if I deploy stupid, their demo russes are going to pick up my demo russes, and then the game is going to be bad. So I couldn't deploy to go first on those, and it's a good thing that I didn't, because I didn't go first. But I used my chimeras as bait. Long story short, he took the bait. He killed the chimeras. He was kind of new, but he put his demo russes within range of my demo russes, and I rolled up and just killed them. And then I basically walked across the table shooting demo cannons into things. So, but I mean, like, once again, he was newer. I kind of gave him pointers and whatnot throughout the game. Do this. You've got these rerolls. You can do these things. He wasn't using his CP very well. He was very new, so you know I used that time to be more of a coach rather than an opponent. But I did win that one. And then we moved on to the third game, which I played against a guy named Rourke. He also had he also had guard and some knights. He was actually John Lennon's first opponent as well. His list had a bunch of different options, and all of his guard squads, like he had Voxcasters. He took Montbard from the Blackstone game. That guy was in his list. It was really weird. I took him very seriously because I had no idea what was going on, so I wasn't quite sure, if he had weird tricks or anything. And his list had a Castellan in it, and that was scary. I didn't want him to go first. He did, killed a tank commander right off rip, and I knew that I had to do some real smart positioning for my tanks to make sure that they didn't die as they moved up to get into position. He did kill a tank commander, and he also killed a manticore, but that moved him into position to where I could knock out his Castellan with 2 demo Russes left, and then I started playing cleanup after that. So I won that game. Come back day 2. I play against Mark Parker. Mark Parker is kind of a local legend. He normally plays orcs. He's very good. He's been to multiple events. I think he's been playing the game for like 20 years. And we have fun games. We're actually, kind of go back and forth. I beat his orcs with my Tau. He beat my Tau with his orcs. I beat him again. And then this game, he had 3 knights, 2 that were Crusaders. They're the ones with the Gatling guns and the Melta cannons. He had a
Yep,
he
that's
had a full
correct.
He had a full payload Manticore. He had a Wyvern, and he had a Colossus Bombard, and he had another knight that was a Warden that was just for the Gatling cannon, some infantry, some Scions, and a company commander. I asked him about his list because once again, he's been playing for a very long time. He's a really good player, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Do knights just run around and blow stuff up? They were Cadmus knights too. I've never played Cadmus. I found out later that the reason why he took the Bombard and Cadmus is because the Bombard ignores cover, is flat damage 2, kills Marines very well, and Cadmus has a strat that allows the knight to intercept or aspect scan, and there's a lot of people in his area that come in from the sides, come in from deep strike, and he didn't want to get caught off guard with that stuff.
Yeah, that's a great tech to snipe out deploy scramblers. Because
Right.
I deep strike a unit of Furies, and then he's just like, "Ha, it's dead now." And then it's
Yeah,
like,
it's
"Well,
gone.
I don't have a backup plan, so I guess I'm just not getting 10 points."
Exactly. So I was concerned about going second in this one, and I have gone second every single game up to this point. But I dropped the fat 6. I picked up 2 knights. He conceded pretty much right off of that because I was going to kill the next knight. He killed a Manticore in response, but that was not the unit he needed to get rid of. And I can shoot him through windows, and he can. So the game was hilariously in my favor after the first turn, and so I won that one. And then my last opponent was another scrub, some new guy. His name's Mark Perry. He's I don't know. He's an ogre of a person, and just kidding. Mark is a really good friend of mine, and I once again had a good matchup in this one. He was playing Chaos. He had Mortarion, that I can see through windows. Um, I had played against Noise Marines multiple times. I knew what I could do in order to beat him, but I went second, and he got a really favorable position with his Noise Marines to where they could cover every single objective other than the one that he had Mortarion sitting on. And if I wanted to kill his Noise Marines, I could not get board presence. And if I could not get board presence, I was going to be 2 turns behind him in scoring. And that's kind of what happened. And he tabled me. So those were my games. I went 3-2. I want to say it was 12th place out of 34 players. Not terrible, considering my 2 losses were against guys who literally get paid to play 40k, which is something that I want to do. So I guess it's not that bad of a weekend.
Yeah, so kind of the big takeaway on a macro scale for me is I know the two losses were basically early board presence. Going second against Chaos isn't the worst as far as damage taken circumstance, but the board presence Chaos can build up with Death Guard or with Noise Marines. Like they can just move to the middle of the table, and like they generally only have a 24-inch threat range. But in ninth edition, all the objectives are generally within 24 inches of each other. So that's one key consideration. But specifically, I know the game with Mark, there's not as much to unpack with that. Noise Marines in the middle of the table, just like you kill them and they're going to clear away your chaff, your obsec. That's kind of a big discussion that we can have at some point about how out of phase and especially out of player turn combat is incredibly strong in ninth edition. So that's like Beasts of Nurgle being able to heroically intervene, and characters in general heroically intervening, stratagems that let you do that. That's a big reason why those units are strong, is because the tempo of ninth edition, I throw an obsec unit onto an objective to deny you those points because I steal the objective from you. Well, if you have an answer to that in my turn and you can kill that unit in my turn, I'm not tanking your primary. Like I have to dedicate true resources, and then it sets up a negative trade. So that's what Mark's list was kind of designed to do. And him getting to go first really put him in a position to do what he wants to do.
Yeah, and he also
But then
took
the
out
game
my.
with
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but he also took out my the one thing that I put in the list to protect my squishy little dudes, which were chimeras. It was the first thing he shot. He got rid of them immediately because he knew when I returned fire, he can just pick up more little dudes.
Yep, exactly. Like he identified he doesn't care if he gets tabled if he can take away all your ability to go out and score. And that's basically what it sounds like he did. But the game with Nick, I want to talk about that one a little more because he doesn't have the raw offensive output that Mark's list had. I mean, I know he had the Dreadnought, so like he's got more offense from range than a lot of Death Guard armies normally have. I say normally. I'm pretty sure those Dreadnoughts are going to become the norm in Death Guard. But the other consideration, I know you had mentioned this, was getting too aggressive and creating a scenario where he can kind of yo-yo and slingshot. So if you want, just kind of break that down, the
Yeah,
strategy of that game and what you felt you could have done differently. And did you feel like there was bait? You just didn't see it. You made a decision thinking it would go one way. Like really, I want to break down that first two turns of the game.
sure. So when I was deploying, like I said, it was Hammer and Anvil, and I had a pretty good large ruin to hide most of my mana cores behind, as well as a central ruin to hide my Russes behind. When he was deploying, he put his Plague Burst Crawler in the center behind his big ruin in the center, and then he put his two Dreadnoughts to his far right, my left, behind a ruin, kind of the same way, like the opposite of where my mana cores were. And he had a bunch of, poxwalkers for spread the sickness and to cleverly use as walls for cloud of flies. I completely forgot cloud of flies even existed in the game. But basically, when I
Yeah,
was,
sorry.
it's fine.
Real fast.
Hmm.
Cloud of Flies is an expensive stratagem now. It's 3 CP to use it on Terminators.
It's 4.
But it's 4 CP to use it on Terminators. It
Yeah.
is insanely expensive, and Death Guard spend a ton of command points early. But it's kind of like Vect. It's like that once per game, I completely ruin my opponent's plans, and if they weren't prepared for it, that can swing the entire game.
And
So, like,
yeah, that's what happened. Like, so basically, the first couple turns were this: he moved up for board position, and then he took out one unit of guardsmen. Nothing crazy. Oh, and he shot an entropy cannon into a chimera. The chimera survived, luckily, and that was that. In my turn, because I picked engage in all fronts instead of thin their ranks, I hightailed both my chimeras up his right flank where all of his poxwalkers were, except for one unit, and then I just shot at poxwalkers. I attempted to do damage to one of his dreads with my mana core, but both of them whiffed like hilariously. They did no damage at all, which it basically put me back a turn as far as that goes. But I kind of positioned to expect his 2 deep strikers. I had all of my conscripts in front of my Russes, and I was trying to push them out to where if they did charge, they were charging just conscripts, and if they die, that's fine. I could just retaliate with the Russes. In his turn 2, he moved all of his poxwalkers up to get 2-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch charges on the Chimera that I yeeted up to the front. And I had not considered that he was going to do that, which I should have. I mean, there's no reason for him not to. And then he did. He charged the Chimera. I did wipe one squad with Overwatch and Vengeance for Arcadia, but that came to bite me in the butt. He did wrap it with the other 2, and I spent 3 command points to let it act at top row and also do Desperate Breakout to get it out of there because I did have a couple plasma gun squads in there. On my turn, when I did all of that, I had no command
Real
points.
fast?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. So if you spend a CP for Overwatch, spend a CP for Vengeance for Cadia,
Yep.
and then 3 more CP to break out,
Yeah.
you spent 5 CP to try to recover from that play. And
Yep.
honestly, I think the CP expenditure was more damaging than even the free movement that you granted his army. And
Yeah.
it's almost you compounded the issue instead of cutting the loss is what it seemed like to me in hearing about it after the fact.
Yeah.
Would
Well,
you kind of agree, or
yeah. That
just made the most of a bad situation?
No, I mean that's true. The problem is that the Chimera was not going to be able to heavy flamethrower itself out of being uh, touched by both Poxwalker squads. I couldn't kill both of them, and I wanted to be able to continue shooting because he had all of his characters and his Terminators in that, hiding right behind the Poxwalkers. I wanted to be able to make sure that I could thin them out still instead of being able to, lose a turn of shooting and not be able to shoot at the majority of his army. So that's what my thought process was. But then I was out and I was like, oh, well, I don't rely on Vengeance for Kidio in my normal games. I shouldn't rely on it right now. And that was a big mistake. I was able to, move my Russes that turn. That was my turn 2, to a position where they could draw line of sight onto all of his characters and his Terminators, and I got ready to shoot at the Terminators. Okay, so just FYI, I'm going to go ahead and do Cloud of Flies. I've got 5 command points here. I'm going to go down to 1 and use this. You can't shoot my Terminators, and I kind of I internally face palmed. I was like, oh crap. That was that's a good play. I didn't expect that, and I ended up killing all of the Poxwalkers, and I attempted I shot at I was able to shoot at the Terminators, but with what I shot at them with, wasn't enough to get the job done. And at that point, they were starting to move up. He was casting, the -1 to hit on them, which was a huge deal. It was really making it much more difficult for me to get rid of them. And eventually, he got the Terminators, the 2 Death Shroud teams, and the Demon Prince up in my face. And at that point, he was tagging Russes, but he wasn't attacking them. And I was attempting to move them away to, far away so that he couldn't kill all 3 of them, so I could at least get some points on secondary. But at that point, it was moot. He got me.
Yeah, so I think kind of one of the big takeaways. Well, I would say there's 2. One obviously is CP management, in understanding path to victory. So, like you alluded to, Vengeance for Cadia was probably your win condition, but in your normal thought process, well, I can't use that in most of my games, and I have heavy firepower anyway, so I don't necessarily need it. But the efficiency it adds, especially with dealing with -1 to hit, it becomes a lot more important. And then the other thing is understanding how to fight against a slow army.
Yeah, actually,
Uh,
to interject, after the fact, I spoke with Nick and Lennon, afterwards, and I asked, I was like, okay, well, obviously I shouldn't have gotten so aggressive with the Chimera. And Nick was like, yeah, that was a gift. You basically threw the game right then and there. And Lennon was like, what you should have done was picked thin their ranks, because I would have gotten at least 6 points on that instead of trying to get close to Nick. Actually, Nick said that I had lost in secondary choice, because when I said engage internally, he was like, oh, this is going to be easy. This is going to be, he's going to be feeding me units and I can use them to wrap. And Lennon was like, what you should have done, thin the ranks while we stand, that's fine. Scramble, sure. And then measure every single unit and measure 17 inches away from that unit. You'd be good to go. And he's right. I should have done that. And I didn't think about doing that. But yeah, I haven't played Death Guard yet.
Yeah, and that's kind of the bigger discussion is Dark Angel's Death Guard, those big, slow, just I control the board type of armies. The best way to combat them is one, you just kind of have to like fall back from them and concede ground, which is really counterintuitive to how most games of ninth edition play. You don't want to concede ground. It's all about skirmishing and getting ground. But if you have any type of mobility and you can force them to dedicate either a turn backwards to go defend their own like deployment zone, or like laterally, it's basically don't give them any free movement by just going close to them for no reason, or no, unless that reason is like hugely important. And then the other thing is they're like a slow momentum, like an avalanche. Like it starts out kind of slow and then it just builds and builds and builds. And like if you're in the path of the avalanche, you're just going to get crushed. So you almost have to concede ground and wrap around them. So just in general, the I think probably the big takeaway from that is like you have said a couple times now is understanding, all right, my normal secondaries are going to be bait because it forces me to go towards that army. And what every army has up on Death Guard is some type of mobility. Like even if your base troops move 6 inches, that's still an inch faster than they move. Like you can create scenarios where it's really hard for them to get where they want to go. So I don't want to go too much longer just because we have done like 30 minutes on this. And we got two other people to talk to, but I think in general, like 3 and 2 out of GT, that's especially with an old Codex army, is a good result. Like you can't just expect to be 5-0 all the time, and learning as much as you did, especially from game one, I think is definitely like that was a very good GT, even though you didn't take it home.
Yeah, I would agree. I put expectations on myself that I probably shouldn't have. I was hoping and expecting to go 4-1, just because I did not too long ago with the horses. So I was a little disappointed in my score, because I beat the people that I should have, and I I guess I lost to the people that I should have. But I just wish I'd made it more of a game. But no, I mean, the game is all about learning. I definitely learned some stuff, and I'm making adjustments to the list, and hopefully I have more success going forward. And also, Dark Eldar are coming out, so I'm not too worried about it.
Perfect. Um, yeah, so I real fast, just like maybe the one or two big changes you might make to the list.
So real fast, I am changing it, putting Scions into the list. I want to have access to old grudges. I think that a lot of people are moving to large linchpin units that are targetable, and old grudges gets you reroll to wounds against those targets. Definitely helps against Dark Angel Terminators. Against Lennon's list, it would probably be the Swarm Lord, just to try to make him easier to kill because he's a linchpin unit, things like that. So a pivot to Scions definitely is, I think, a move in the right direction. I'm trying to keep as much plasma in the list, anyways, just because plasma is really good. I'm cutting a Russ. I don't want to, but I think that it's the right move. And I'll be getting some reps in with this list, and maybe by next time we're recording, I have some. How do you say, some good games, good practice, and uh, the list overall moves better. So that's about it.
All right, perfect. Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself there. um, so I could honestly probably talk for another hour about like the nuances of guard, but we should move on to Tim.
Yeah, unfortunately, this
So,
isn't the Will and Dan show.
Yeah.
It's a
It
pretty
could
good
be.
show, though.
It could be.
I'd
No,
watch
but that
that,
was
buddy.
honestly a great conversation, and I love getting that type of a GT breakdown because it's a big focus on a lot of macro discussion, understanding meta, understanding decision making, but you still have the little nuances you can take away to help not just yourself but everyone that's listening. Hopefully, understand what to look for, what common traps that players will set for you, and also like you can set your own traps. Like if you know, hey, he wants to get extra movement off of a chimera, you can set up and put that in such a way that you might be able to get line of sight. You might get this, you might get that. So like there's plays and counterplays you can set up, but just on a basic level, I think that was a very good conversation. Um, but to dive right into the next one, Mr. Tim, what did you play, good sir?
To the surprise of probably no one, I played Pure Sisters. And normally, I'm kind of, I guess, semi-known for running the Ponitent list, which is just basically it's fun to call it Ponitent, but I call it Mech Sisters. Um, Unfortunately, a big part of the strength is the overwhelming heavy bolter fire, and I kind of um, guessed or assumed, and it ended up being correct, that there would be a heavy Death Guard and Dark Angel presence and good terrain at the GT. And if you've ever shot heavy bolters into Death Guard, it feels like you're just shooting AP 0 bolters into Primaris Marines. Yeah, mortifiers have good melee, but I'm not paying for half a mortifier. I want a full mortifier, so I've been kind of pivoting into a pure Bloody Rose list, just because one of Sister's biggest strengths is their melee because they punch well above their weight, and more importantly, they also deliver that melee very well via the use of Miracle Dice, and usually able to max out their threat ranges.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, real fast, two things
Go
I
for
want
it.
to jump in on. One, just kind of as an aside for our listeners, one of the big things with heavy bolter's efficiency is obviously strength 5 and damage 2 against space marines who are toughness 4, 2 wounds is super efficient. But Death Guard specifically, they have toughness 5, they have -1 damage, and they have a psychic power to go to toughness 6. So you go from like wounding most of the field on 3s and then just killing them if they fail to save, to now you're wounding on 5s, doing 1 damage, and they have a 6-up feeling of pain and a way to heal. And then kind of the same thing with Dark Angels Terminators. They have the permanent transhuman, they have 3 wounds, and they have really efficient healing. So those two meta considerations, heavy bolters went from hyper efficient to very inefficient just on those two matchups. And at this point of the meta, if you're going to a GT, you need to plan on playing against that style of army at least once. Um, and then what you were talking about with the Bloody Rose sisters, uh, again, this whole game is about tempo and skirmishing and trades. And if you have Bloody Rose sisters, that's exactly what they do. Like you can send a 150-point unit in, it can go kill some 200 or 300-point unit, die, and it doesn't matter. Like you're going to outlast your opponent. And even if like you might end up getting tabled because you do like just the damage back hurts, you can get tabled and still win. Like that's what Harlequins, their entire game plan is. I'm going to get tabled but score all my points. Like you have to score a 90 to beat my Harlequin army, even if you table me. So that's the two kind of macro meta decisions to me. It seemed like you had built into that list. But continue with maybe any more nuances or small micro choices that you made, because I know
Yeah,
sisters have a ton of they're almost, and I don't want to get all the flack I know this is going to get. Sisters feel a little bit like chaos in how they want all of their interlocking like mechanisms to work and all the little micro changes that completely change the list, even though it might look the exact same. Oh, I see sisters, I see battle sisters, I see retributors. It's all the same stuff, but it can be wildly different.
yeah. It's getting the table hasn't happened too much. It's something. It's definitely something I'm not afraid of. But this list has 18 actual units in it. And basically, it's a single Bloody Rose battalion. I have Kyria Draxus with Terrify. I don't Terrify's the no Overwatch power, and I don't actually use it that much just because it's a failure point, and I don't want to. It's Warp Charge 6, but it's a very failable power. It's a very deniable power, and it was more just because I didn't really see any use for any of the other powers. She's mostly in there for the fight last, and we'll come back to that. The Triumph, that is the big 200 point funeral procession, and she basically kind of powers the rest of the list. I have a missionary with the +1 attack aura. He's basically the HQ priest, and he has the Book of St. Lucius for the +3 inches to his +1 attack aura. Very good in the melee army. 3x5 troops with the banners, because the banners are now free. Magifier, who's the banner character. She was my warlord. She had the warlord trait for an extra miracle die in my turn. And then the Litanies of Faith, which is every turn. That was my turn, opponent's turn. I could re-roll the result of one miracle die. 8 Zephyrim, another unit of 8 Zephyrim. 3 units of 8 Repentia. 5 Seraphim, and I spent the extra 8 points to give 4 Hand Flamers to that unit. 5 Retributors with 4 Multi-Meltas and 2 Cherubs. And then what probably differentiates my list the most from other lists is 2 Exorcists, and I'll go into why those were in the list, and then 2 Rhinos. And it comes in at a very neat 2,000 points and 11 CP. So the big things that kind of like differentiate it from the normal list, Kyria Draxus with the Fight Last. I really wanted Fight Last in my army, and it was pretty much coming down to between her and the Colexis. The upside of the Colexis is he had some extra utility, being a little bit tankier, with the hitting on 6, only being able to be hit on 6s and the 4-up invuln. And his Fight Last isn't turned off by Death Guard. Because Kyria's Fight Last only works she charges, and so if she charges in to the Glooming or whatever it is, makes them count as, or the Foul Blight Spawn makes her count as not as having charged, her Fight Last doesn't work. It's the way I read it. When I was pondering that, is Kyria can go into the Rhino, which gives her, extra 3 inches for a threat range, and also lets me move her around. And so I was able to basically find that I could deliver that Fight Last much more reliably and much more safely. The Retributors are hands down like one of the best units in the game, in my opinion, so of course they had to be here. But actually, I went from running 3 Retributor squads to running 2 Retributor squads and 1 Exorcist, and I actually ended up moving to 2 Exorcists and 1 Retributor squad. And the main reason is I ended up identifying that one of the things I was having a hard time was scoring a decent primary score on the top of turn 2. Just being able to put stuff on objectives and not have it just kind of get like blown away and getting knocked off an objective with basically little investment from my opponent. And I also found my army was very, 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 very lethal within like the 24-inch kind of kill band or threat range. And Retributors just kind of add to that. And also every single Retributor I add, they have a kind of like a logistics tail of I have to add more Rhinos or places to hide them, or expose them to charges, or screen them, or spend 2 CP for Storm Retribution to fire them, or spend CP to reserve them. And generally, I tried out the Exorcist because I just wanted something to kind of like do that attrition war against my opponent, because Sisters operate in big, explosive, kind of haymaker, where like they just kind of come at you and they trade, and then they come in again, they trade again, but it's not always regular. And what the Exorcists give me is they just give me this unit, this T8 durable unit that pretty much got me while we stand, we fight. With ease, without having to play weird or do anything kind of that wasn't, synergizing with my game plan. But also, they just kind of towed on to my home objectives every single turn, and just provided something that wasn't really worth attempting to knock out. Once I started pushing the Repentia Rhinos up and started throwing stuff into my opponent's throat.
Would you say that's something they might not be necessarily like as efficient point for point as the retributors, but you don't have to really invest anything. You just deploy them, and they're that different target that the opponent doesn't necessarily want to deal with. So they might not be like they don't have as high of a ceiling, but they're just a really good. Just here they are. They're going to do their thing. I kind of don't even have to think about them. Is that kind of the thought process because you have so many other moving parts?
That was pretty much exactly it, because I would look at every single unit, and if you've ever seen the movie Moneyball, where they're just literally just trying to buy runs, they're not trying to buy wins, they're trying to buy runs. When I was building list, I was trying to buy points, not wins, points.
Good reference.
And I was like, well, how many points are these extras getting me? And generally, they were, once I put them in a list, my primary score on average per game immediately went up. It gave me a very good secondary to take, especially when my opponent did give up any. And also, they just generally gave me they provided a reliable cost for my opponent for every turn that they got to keep existing. But the decision to take him out required such a significant commitment that often my opponent would decide it wasn't worth it. But the cost to allow them to live every single round was definitely, it was real and it was reliable. So that plus the points ended up being like why I kept them in.
I want to interject real quick. Go watch Moneyball. It's really good.
And another just a consideration is those toughness 8 vehicles. Like, there's a lot of things that can just take them out, but a lot of armies don't have that tech. And like Death Guard, you mentioned kill bands. Death Guard has a relatively short kill band for dealing with things like that. And maybe they bring Plague Burst Crawlers and they can do some chip damage, but it's not reliable to just remove those threats quickly. So in some matchups, you'll identify, okay, they will get killed. I'm not going to take while we stand, we fight. But there's a lot of matchups where they're just going to be on the table for 5 turns. And you don't have to put a unit in for every single game they have to do this. It's just a lot of games they will, and in the games they don't, I adjust my plan. And it feels like they're a really good tech piece for that reason.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what it was. Is they became a tech piece, and it was the damage. I mean, they're basically a slot machine that I pull every turn. I'm kind of like, oh, hey, am I going to get 777s this turn? You know, sometimes maybe, but even when they weren't shooting or doing real damage, they were doing something. And also, if there was like, they were very good at picking up the spare. So if my opponent had like 1 or 2 models left on like an objective that was like, 50 inches away or something like that, and it just wasn't reasonable, to spend a bunch of sixes from a Miracle Dice pool and send like a unit of Zephyrim or Repentia way over there. But if those two guys lived, it swings the primary like 5 or 10 points. And it's kind of like, well, if you don't have that range, you're kind of like, well, I guess I'm just stuck here. I guess he's just going to get those points. But being able to throw essentially 63 strength 8 shots, you usually kind of gets it done. And some people are like, yeah, it's overkill. I'm like, well, the thing is those shots aren't buying me kills. I'm not looking at the points of what I killed. They bought me points, victory points in the game.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing, especially for new players. Like, war games, it's fun. You want to fight, you want to kill things. Like tabling an opponent, that's super cool. But that doesn't matter as much as just scoring points. Like, whoever scores the most points wins the game. So it definitely feels like your list specifically, the way you designed it was all about the tempo of points and not really the tempo of combat. And you have so many units in this MSU style build that you probably don't get tabled, like you said, but you're able to constantly dedicate and replace and refresh on objectives as needed. And having T8 anchors in your backline, it lets you have all 16 other units can really play on 1 or 2 objectives. So it really does. It just, again, it's all about missions. It's all about primary and secondary, and building a list with that in mind, you kind of function independent of the opponent you're playing against. And that in itself is a very strong tech. And with that, again, we could go probably an hour on list theory, but we did have a GT to talk about. So let's jump into that. If you want to just give us quick hitters, what your record was, the armies you played against, and then we'll go back and do maybe a takeaway on 1 or 2 of the games.
Sure. So, like Will, I was planning to go 4-1 with maybe a shot of threatening top table. Um, you know, Unfortunately, it didn't go that way. I ended up 3-2. Although considering the player field, this was honestly one of the most stacked player fields I've seen in a while, even for a Florida GT. Um, I was I ended up I think 10th out of 30, and honestly, I was not getting into the top third with 3-2. I wasn't super upset about with the player field, and it was really good games. As far as the actual GT, I actually played into Kyle, our local guy down here. Same one Will played into, our Sigmar dude. And I actually considered reserving my Exorcist because he had a full payload Manticore and he had more drops than I did. And even though I thought I'd be able to hide him, I was like, well, he might get an angle on him, and put some shots with the Rust into it and then finish it off with the Manticore. And then I kind of ignored that little voice and I was like, no, just start him behind this L-shaped ruin, you'll be fine. And even if he goes first, he won't be able to pick it up. Well, he went first and he picked one up. And I was kind of like, well, I guess I'm getting 10 points for while we stand, we fight. He also picked up a Rhino, and the Repentia hopped out behind a ruin. And it was just kind of that eye-watering shooting phase. I was like, yeah, well, I guess I haven't played against Guard in a while. I forgot how eye-watering their shooting phases can be. But when I saw, and we even talked about this before a game, he was kind of hoping, he said he was hoping he would match into me. And I was like, well, how much infantry do you have? And he's like, oh, like 20 or something like that. I'm like, okay, well, I'll be honest, if we play, I think that's going to be the reason you lose. He's like, really? He's like, they just don't do anything. They just die. I'm like, well, they're your board control, and we'll talk about it if we play. But we ended up playing, and if you look at that second picture that I posted, that was after my turn one. It was Dawn of War. He didn't move his tanks up or anything, and basically those Repentia that got forcibly removed from the Rhino ran up, charged into that Chimera. Actually, they charged the Chimera and they charged some Bulgarin that were there on that objective. And then the Zephyrum charged in as well, just into the Chimera. The Repentia scooped up the Bulgarin like they weren't even there, and then swung around, swung around super wide. And then the Zephyrum activated, just moved 6 inches the other direction. And then I fought again with the Zephyrum, with the Repentia, and that girl all the way left swung over and tagged those 2 tanks. And then pretty much for the rest of the game, it was just kind of like he would drop some signs down to get scramblers or whatever, and then I would counter drop with like Zephyrum or Repentia or whatever. I would charge into the Scions with like one girl, and then the rest of the unit would like whip around and would like just tag all his tanks and just like wrap and tag his tanks and everything. He actually didn't really get to fire much the entire. I don't think Pask fired like once the entire game because he was just constantly tagged by stuff that was coming in reserves. But he put up a pretty good score though, just because he had so much stuff all over the board. And I think the final score of that game was like 82-48 or something like that. My game 2, I played against Mark Parker. He was running the Knights and then the Guard artillery, and I had, as we're setting up and everything, normally every single game, I'm kind of like, hey, I always ask everyone, like, can you advance charge? Can you fall back and shoot and or charge? Can you heroically intervene? And can you aspect scan? Those are like the 4 things I ask every single person. And even though Mark was running a new list, Mark and I play almost on a weekly basis. And it just felt like another Tuesday night. And he was also running Knights. And so I was just going to go, like, I knew they could advance and charge, and knew, of course, they could fall back, shoot and charge, and then they could heroically intervene. And something in my head was kind of like, hey, ask him if he can Auspex scan. And then whatever reason, I was like, shut up, little voice. Knights can't Auspex scan. And he goes first. Half my stuff's in reserves. And he does a really good job pinning me in my deployment zone. He pops the Rhino. I jump the Repentia out of charge range. And basically he doesn't have anything left to shoot into Repentia at that point. And then the Repentia, my turn, charge into the Knight through the wall so he can't see, can't overwatch. I move the missionary up so they get an extra attack. I pop +1 to wound. And this is the Knight that reduces damage by 1. and I still like take like 12, and it has a 5 bin in combat, and I still managed to take like 12 wounds off the thing or something like that. He swings back. I pop the stratagem to do mortals when I die. I take like another 3 or 4 mortals off it. I high roll a little bit, and then I fight again. And even though this thing has a 5-up invuln in combat and reduces damage by 1, I take 22 wounds off this thing in that fight phase. And so I'm kind of like, okay, like I think that was a lot of CP, but again, this is kind of like some of the reasons why I build so much CP in my list. I was like, I think I can, as long as I have a good turn, good shooting, and I charge something, I can do this. I bring in all my stuff. I bring in my exorcist. I had to bring in like 90% of my stuff this turn. I bring in my Seraphim. I actually put them. He does a pretty good job of screening out his backfield, but he didn't remember vertical distance. So I actually bring the Seraphim on top of the ruin in his deployment zone. And their hand flamers are 18 inches when they use the strat. And I just pick up all his infantry. And he had moved those infantry to get into the center of the board, so he actually couldn't do his midfield scramblers. And so at that point, scramblers was pretty much denied, which helped kind of bring this a little bit closer. The last thing I bring in the Retributors with the intention of popping the strat for, +1 damage and then plus 12-inch range, and I bring them in next to the Triumph and within 9 inches of his one knight. And he's kind of like, "Are you done with your reserves?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm done." He's like, "Okay, I'm going to spend 3 CP on my aspect scan." And I was just like, surprise Pikachu face. And the Retributors are just gone. I'm kind of like, well, Mark, I'll be honest, I think you just won the game, like right here. And I didn't give up. I gave him as hard a game as I could. I eventually killed the other knight with some melee, and I was able to start flipping objectives. I killed all his infantry, and I was able to get like a squad of Zephyrim. I actually charged his full payload Manticore, piled out of combat with it into the Colossus Bombard, and then consolidated into the Wyvern, which was taking a pretty heavy toll on my army. And I was kind of able to, like, at that point, I had, all he had was a full payload Manticore and a knight that was on like 3 wounds. But the game was just too far gone at that point, and the math had changed. So I guess the big takeaway from that one was just trust your instinct, even if it's against someone you're always playing. And if they're running like a chapter or a knight household that no one's ever heard of, stop and ask them like what does that give them? What's their relic, their warlord trait, and their special stratagem from like that house or chapter tactic, whatever. But yeah, it's the one time where you don't trust that little voice in your gut is when it's going to get you. So that was the big takeaway from that one.
Yeah, don't assume.
Game 3, I was kind of like, okay, well, I just came off a pretty embarrassing loss. I put up good points in that, better points than I expected in that last game. But I really wanted to make sure I was still like kind of in the top third of the field. So this next game, I was like, I got to go pedal to the metal, and it was a really good mission for me. It's the one with direct assault, and so if you stack, it's 5 objective mission, and if you stack direct assault and domination, you can, as long as you can control the center, you can really, really, really rack up the score. I was kind of like, okay, well, please don't pair me into Death Guard because they are better at this than I am on this mission. I actually got paired into Salamanders. A guy I haven't played in a while, but he's a kind of a local guy. His name is Matt Hunt. The Ignore AP one is going to be a little bit annoying, but let's see what he's got. I saw he was running double drop pods, and just all the Melta and Grav in the world. I was like, okay, I think I got a plan here. If I just do my while we stand, we fight as normal, keep the Exorcists off the board, for a turn or two, because I don't actually think I need them in this matchup. Ignore the Leviathan because his Leviathan had the Cyclonic Melta Lance and it only had 1. So if I just stayed like 26 inches or 26.1 inches away from the Leviathan, and if I just spread all my crap out as much as possible and screen the Triumph and screen the Repentia Rhinos, and just work on the board control, like I should be able to do this. And that's actually what ended up happening. If you look at the third picture, that is turn 3 with the 2 drop pods on the board. One's all the way on the right, And that other one up there on the top, that's actually not where he put it. He actually had to put it in that top left corner because I am everywhere. I got Repentia on his objective. I have a whole bunch of stuff in the center, Triumph on my objective, and some troops on the bottom right objective, and some jump girls on the top left objective. And the deployment was pretty close to that too. I basically just deployed all my troops right on the line. I put all my Zephyrim in my backfield, just because they could screen out for a couple turns, but then they could fly up because they moved 12 plus D6, and they could rejoin the fight. And so it was pretty low opportunity cost to keep them back there. I put the rhinos in front of that big ruin, uh, with the idea that if they got popped, the rhino, if he didn't have much shooting left, their Pencha could jump forward. If he did have a lot of shooting left, they could jump backwards behind the wall. And then the Triumph was behind those rhinos just to hold the objective and be tough and be screened, and just make sure that if he tried to drop in the sides, he wouldn't have any angles like grav guns or anything into the Triumph, because it'd be too steep of an angle. So he gets first turn, and he looks, and I've completely filled my deployment zone, and he has like pretty much no viable targets. And so I can see him kind of considering like where he get angles from if he drops a drop pod down or whatever, and he sees he has no real viable targets. So he just kind of moves his troops up a little bit, does scramblers or whatever, passes turn. My turn, I just advance everyone. Everyone goes out all over the place. I end up launching some Repentia out of that Rhino, and I kill one of his units that are on his objectives. And I actually didn't take scramblers this one because I wanted a 100-point gain. So I launched some stuff forward, and I get direct assault, I get domination. I take out one of his units, and I'm on like four out of the 5 objectives. So his turn goes, he gets 5 points on primary, and those are actually the last primary points he scores all game. He looks to bring his drop pod. The board state is now even worse for him, and so he kind of, I think at this point he should have just cut his losses and brought the pods down, try to take back that board control. But he saw that his drop pod alpha strike would be even worse than it would have been turn 1. So he keeps him off the board again. He also has Vanguard vets with no bonuses to charge in outflank as well. So he keeps that all off the board. He moves his TAC Marines up, does some shooting, does some charges. I was hoping he would fight the troops first so I could interrupt with their Repentia. He actually swings at their Repentia first. He does 5 wounds, and I roll 4 6s on the invulns. And you can just kind of see just the air kind of come out of his sails. And he ends up killing 0 Repentia in that fight phase. The Repentia kill those dudes and run up, and those Repentia pretty much just run borderline uncontested in his deployment zone for pretty much the rest of the game. I screen it out, and I think the game, he finally brings everything in, way off the board. I gets no points. I run over, kill it. I think that game ends 131, is what that score ended up being. That puts me back up and kind of into the stratified air of the front room, and I get paired into Mark Perry from Art of War. I haven't played against New Mortarion yet. I know Sisters kind of have a better shot at killing him than anyone, but still, I've never played him against him, and I also know it's Mark Perry. There's a little bit of a fear aura going on there. So I decide to just put my Triumph down, reserve 1 Exo in case he gets first turn and gets into me. I keep 1 Exo on the board in case I go first. I can put some damage into him. And I start the normal units off the board. And I just basically bubble wrap my Exo and my Triumph with everything. And that actually ends up costing me the game because he does go first. He doesn't actually send Mortarion into me, but he takes control of the center ruin with Mortarion and the Noise Marines. The Foul Blight spawn, he activates him in the movement phase in the wrong order. He ends up a little bit out of position. And I see that error, and then he tries to use Warp Time to fix his error, and I use the Sisters Warp Deny stratagem to deny that. So now his Noise Marines, there's a little corner where they're unprotected by the Foul Blight spawn, and he ends up picking up all 3 of my troop squads and a squad of Zephyrim. So whatever 15 plus 8 is, 23. I ended up losing like 23 infantry, like right there. And I'm kind of like, well, I think I just lost like all my board control. But I'm still going to try to make it a game. Rhino runs up, Repentia get out of the Rhino, advance. Rhino runs up, Rhino tags the Noise Marines. Repentia go in, I scoop up all the Noise Marines, avoiding the Foul Blight Spawn Aura. And then he ends up, killing them with the return fire from the Noise Marines, but, they're kind of written off, so it's whatever. Exorcist, the lone Exorcist does like, even with reroll wounds against Psychers, does like 2 wounds to Mortarion. He just hits all his 4-ups. The next turn was kind of a blur. I think he ends up just bringing the Terminators into the center ruin, does a little bit of shooting. Because at this point, my army had like scattered like cockroaches and kind of splits, which is honestly how I should deploy. I should deploy more stuff on the board and just split. But the Retributors come in. The Retributors actually overkill Mortarion and kill him before they even pull the Cherubs. But they're behind obscuring because they were shooting through. Because Mortarion can't be obscured, they were shooting through a wall. That was actually kind of a mistake too, because they could have picked up a couple Terminators, but they actually have no more shooting targets now because they're in a corner behind a wall. The Exorcist picks up a couple Terminators. Seraphim come down, kill a Chaos Spawn that he was using to screen his Plague Marines in the backfield from the rest of my army. And so by killing that Chaos Spawn, it opens it up where I can outflank some Repentia. The Repentia get into his Plague Marines, and I pretty much flip it into a hammer and anvil deployment. And then I jump the Zephyr forward, and I kill like a random character on an objective. And at that point, I've flipped a bunch of objectives. But at that point, I've pretty much run out of steam. He brings the second Terminator squad in. They honor Prince into the Retributors with our men, take over that objective. I have no answers for that. The other Terminator brick runs over the Foul Blight Spawn, kills the Zephyrim, and I now have kind of at this point, I think I'm down to 1 Repentia squad. I really have no real way to deal with those Terminators because Kyria Draxus had died, so I don't have Fight Last. I don't have multiple combat units to dogpile, and so that at that point, he pretty much owns 3 objectives. He puts Lucius the Eternal on the 4th one. And it's just at that point the game's just not long enough. He has too many Terminators. I just don't have an answer for him. So I don't know. I don't even remember what his score was. It was like something like 90 him to like 45 me or something like that. And then the last game, I actually play against one of our local guys, Will Lozado. He's playing Death Guard. And this is, I think it was Vital Intelligence, the last one. I was very happy I was kind of hoping to avoid Death Guard all weekend long. They're not a bad matchup, but I feel like they're like one of my least favorable matchups, especially on certain missions. And I actually put the picture up, his pink Death Guard versus my purple sisters. And I actually was happy on this mission because the faster army usually always wins this mission. And so pretty much I kind of somewhat split my forces. I put an Exorcist on either end, just to kind of like, work angles and make it really uncomfortable for him to spread out. I put a Repentia Rhino on either side to kind of, work the angles. And then I put all my Flying Girls and the Triumph and pretty much everything else behind that center ruin. I don't remember who actually went first. I think it might have been him. I don't remember. But he moves into that center ruin at the kind of like top of that picture. There's an objective in there. And he starts moving his Terminators out there. He puts a Rhino there. The Rhino's he was running a lot of Rhinos with Plague Marines. And I think he was, maybe trying to hold the objective with the Rhino with OBSEC inside in the hopes that if I had killed the Rhino or if I had shot it, that OBSEC guys would spill out. So what I do instead is I just hold as many things as I can, and I actually move, advance, and charge a squad of troops into that Rhino, and just they're in the Foul Blight spawn aura, so the Rhino gets to fight first. It kills nothing. The sisters fight the Rhino. They kill nothing, but now I've flipped that objective with OPSEC and actually hand them a 0 on primary turn 1. Turn 2, I managed to outflank some Repentia and kill his top left, the Plague Marines on his top left objective. And that's enough to hold him to 2 objectives, gives him a 5. And then he basically gets 25 on primary that game. I get 45 because I just take a bunch of secondaries to just require me just to exist. And then I just suppressed his primary those first 2 turns. And I think what really killed him was 1, this mission, but 2, he took a bunch of secondaries that required actions. So even though he had a lot of more MSU than normal in the Death Guard army, he was just constantly paralyzed by having to have units not advance, just walk normally, at a snail's pace and not shoot or attack, just do actions. And then with the fact that I was scoring my secondaries more easily, and then I was suppressing his primary, I ended up kind of just pulling out ahead, and I think I won that one 91-65, and I finished the weekend 3-2.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself there again. All right, so I guess one big question we can ask is like, was there a macro play or something that you could have done differently in the games that you lost, or something like what was a big takeaway that you feel you can focus on for going 4-1 or better at your next event, even with a field as stacked as that?
So I have no idea what the my win path would look like had I beaten Mark, but I think I've noticed a pattern over several events now where like it's just every time I don't listen to that gut feeling, it ends up biting me, and I think that's a confidence issue, and I think honestly I just need to have more confidence and faith in my ability as a player, my ability to come up with a good strategy. And so if I have that gut instinct on a strategy, I should really probably listen to it, especially because pregame is the most level-headed and emotionless you're going to be. And if you try to switch gear, being able to adapt is good, but in the middle of a game, the emotions are running high. You got pressure of the clock, pressure of the game. I think honestly, I just need to just listen to that gut instinct before the game starts. The game versus Mark, um, it basically came down to he had studied me. He's kind of told me, and he knew what my tendencies were as a player, and then he had more reps into my faction than I had into his. So there was not only was there a skill gap there, but there was also a research gap. So it just, to me, that kind of emphasized, again, life gets in the way and everything, but I think, it definitely showed what prep can do going into an event like this. Really studying not just how an army plays, but how a person plays as well. And then that one, Chaos doesn't really do that much alpha turn 1, but they do board control very well. So I think that one, if I started more of my stuff on the board and kind of split my army, because my army has a lot of units of 2, or 2 types of unit, 2 Exorcists, 2 Zephyrim, so on and so forth. And if I split my forces behind the 2 big obscuring pieces in that specific matchup, I think that gives me much more of a game to play. And focus less on Mortarion in that game and more on the Noise Marines and on the Terminators, because those were the really scary parts of his list.
Okay,
but that was pretty much it.
Perfect. It sounds like kind of the thing is to summarize, like, one, trust yourself as a player, which that's something I think a lot of people need to realize, especially in perceived difficult matchups. You had referenced like the fear aura a little bit, and like when you know someone's really good at the game, you'll get into a situation of analysis paralysis. Like you're trying to figure out stuff that isn't even there. Like they deploy, I don't know, like a random fiend on the table, and you're just like, all right, he's got an idea for that. Like, what's he going to do? And you overanalyze. He's just dropping a model. Like it's not that big a deal, but you can get into your own head and get in your own way, and it actually, like, you beat yourself. So I think that's a good point, and something we could even talk about more in the future, is how to like have confidence in your plan for your path to victory, and then you had alluded to it, making changes in game, but still like you have to have a plan to win a game, and if you're just sticking stuff on the table and YOLOing it can get tough. But before we're kind of running long already, and we've got a whole bunch to talk to Lennon about. So, do you have any other takeaways or last parting thoughts before I jump in and we hit a bunch of stuff on Lennon's event?
No, not really. I'm very happy with the list. I felt like every single part, no real part of the list underperformed or overperformed. And it's just I'm very excited just to kind of just get more and more reps to the list and just kind of find more plays and limits that I can test. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna stick with the list and just gonna keep getting games. Hopefully here pretty soon.
All right, perfect. Well, John, are you ready for a deep dive? I know we've got quite a bit we can talk about, but unless we want this to be a 3-hour podcast, we can kind of roll some stuff together. What are you feeling like doing, John?
Right on. So I'll go through my stuff still. I'll keep it at a normal pace. First things first. I was playing my Tyranids. Tyranids are my baby. They are the first army that I played in 40k. They're definitely the army that I've played the longest. So I think the first one. I've been playing 40k for very close to 13 years now, and I think the first 7 or 8 I played purely Tyranids. I didn't play any other armies until I really didn't play anything until the very end of 7th edition. So 4th, 5th, and 6th, and most of 7th, I exclusively played Tyranids. So it was really nice to kind of get back into that because recently I've been quite the Imperium player, with some Gene Stealer cult in there too, of course. But this was kind of the my very small variation of the D McCarran list that was written by mostly Colin Sherman of Biffpod and Alex McDougall, one of my fellow Art 4 coaches. They did most of it. I kind of helped write it, but frankly, they did all the playtesting. And then I just took it and changed, the size of some Gaunt units, some very minor stuff, just to make it feel better for me. I like having more smaller Gaunt squads than just these big 30-mans. So the list ended up being the Swarmlord, a Hive Tyrant, 20 Hormagaunts, 10 Hormagaunts, and 30 Termagants with Devourers. This is all cracking so far. Then a Lictor and 2 Demon-Karens. The Demon-Karen is the big 4-year-old bug. I think we've talked about it before. It's awesome. Honestly, it's absolutely amazing, and it literally makes the faction relevant, whereas they just wouldn't be if the Demon-Karen didn't exist. Then I went High Fleet Kronos for patrol and took a Neurothrope, 3 Rippers, 10 more Hormagaunts, just have another small unit and easier access to Deepest Shadow, which is the Kronos specific anti-cycler spell or stratagem. And then a Exocrine and 6 Hive Guard. And frankly, the reason I came back to Tyranids was one, they're very fun army to play. There's so much movement jank with Tyranids, especially Kraken, that I love so much. I really made movement jank close combat armies kind of my bread and butter, and I tend to do pretty well with them. So the reason I came back to Tyranids was frankly that Tyranids have the opposite problem from Demons. Demons have amazing data sheets and frankly dog shit stratagems and rules and warlord traits and relics. Like they're all so bad, but they have amazing like just data sheets. And Tyranids have the exact opposite problem, where they actually have really good stratagem trees, really good spells. Admittedly, they might as well not even have warlord traits, but they have one good relic, and then they've got their adaptations, which are really solid, which just kind of replaces the warlord traits anyway, so that's all good. But their data sheets are garbage. Like you compare like a Carnifex to a Talos, and it's like, geez, do I want to pay 5 points for an extra wound to feel no pain at 4-up invuln, the fly keyword, guns, and better combat? Yeah, no, I think I'll take the Talos over the Carnifex. Great, like good talk. But finally, like introducing the 4-year-old units, the Demon Karen is actually just a good data sheet, which is just like a novelty for Tyranids. We're used to paying like 15 points for a 1-wound T4 model, and that's just so depressing when it doesn't have a gun or and it has a 5-up armor save. Like the Gene Stealers die so fast, Gaunts die so fast. You kind of like win while dying, and the Demon Karen is amazing because it's nice to actually have a real unit to put all these buffs on and get some good mileage out of that. That makes me think I can hang with, the proverbial big boy armies, like the Dark Angels, the Death Guard, Harlequins, like all of the sisters, all the top tier armies that have more recent rules updates or have been more traditionally competitive over the last year than Tyranids have. So I was very happy with the list going in. But
Can I jump in real fast on just a couple little things?
anyway,
So one, just so people kind of understand, what I've found is you said it perfectly. Tyranids and demons are like yin and yang. They want to do the exact same thing. Chaos does it with all those awesome data sheets, and then Tyranids do it with all the awesome stratagems. But the Dimacarian specifically, if you compare that to a Keeper of Secrets, the Dimacarian's 230 points, the Keeper of Secrets is 240, can be 230, whatever. So basically, the trade-off you get is the Dimacarian is more durable, faster, and more killy. So like where normally Chaos would do all those things better, the Dimacarian actually does it better than the Keeper of Secrets, and it has all the stratagem support and psychic powers and everything. So that, I think, like you were saying, is what really pushed it over the edge. Is they finally have this good centerpiece unit that says, "Here I am, try to deal with me." And that, honestly, I love this list for that reason. Now, before, because I know you've talked about this list and you've talked about this GT on a few different podcasts and gotten pretty deep. A couple like little really small micro things I wanted to bring up and ask before we dive into the event itself is things like, what psychic powers did you take specifically, and why? Things like paroxysm, the uh, ability to make opponents fight last, and then what. So I know, like, you have the flying hive tyrant that has the resonance barb with onslaught. Like, there's some very specific decisions that were made in this list. So can you kind of go into that a little bit before we dive into the event itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's oh man, there are a lot of little tech choices in the list, of course. So you say like, oh yeah, Demon Karen's just a better, faster, keeper. Well, no, a keeper moves 16 inches or 14 or 16. Demon Karen moves 12. The keeper can advance and charge naturally, but you need to get a lot of the buffs working to get the Demon Karen faster. Because when you put all the buffs in the Demon Karen, it's like one of the fastest things in the game. Inherently, it's not. So one of the big things is that nothing in this list can advance and charge, but Onslaught is a spell that lets me advance and charge, and it's Warp Charge 6, and the Resonance Barb gives someone +1 to cast. And that's so the Hive Tyrant is the guy with the Resonance Barb. And straight up, if I'm casting Onslaught, I need to pass it. So getting it to essentially a Warp Charge 5, being cagey with conservative with my command points and making sure that I always have a CP reroll for Onslaught is is really really important. So the Resonance Barb on the Flyrant is a very simple. When you look at a Flyrant and what it does, it's really hard to shoot at it because one, it's actually a very small base, and obscuring you have to measure to the base, not just to the line of sight. So it's very easy to hide a Hive Tyrant behind obscuring terrain because it actually is a very small like footprint. It's just that there are giant wings sticking out, which don't actually matter when there's obscuring terrain involved. Um, so it's easy to hide, and then with target priority, there's a Swarm Lord, there's an Exocrine, there are two Democarans. It's really hard to get to a point where not only is the Hive Tyrant visible, but also your guns are best used going into the Hive Tyrant. 'Cause by the time the Hive Tyrant is like actually going out and doing his thing, usually there's a Democaran touching you, and another Democaran that maybe you've killed it, maybe you haven't, but that is in position to touch you. The Swarm Lord usually pushes up at the same time that the last Democaran launches to provide a little bit extra pressure, and then the Hive Tyrant's just floating around, casting Smite, Psychic, and Psychic Scream and Onslaught. Because he knows three spells, one of which is Smite, and cast three spells, he's always doing Smite Scream with +1 to cast, which is so he's good for that third Smite where it's normally Warp Charge 7. Now he still pass on a 6, but he's very consistent, like 2 to 3 mortal wounds here. He's got a couple plank shots. He's not bad in combat. He just does a lot of chip damage in every phase and gets really annoying. So I absolutely love the Flyrant. He was honestly one of the MVPs of the weekend, other than the obvious Team of Karens. But he's extremely valuable.
Yeah,
Um,
and one little thing with that too is, like, he feels bad to focus because he doesn't do anything overwhelming. So you feel like it's a bad trade to take him out early as like the opposing player. But if you don't and you just let him function for 5 turns, like, he's just consistent. So that's one of the things, and you mentioned as well the update to the, well, I say update, ninth edition terrain rules made him a lot better, because before, like, a gun line can just pick him up. Now the way the terrain's set up and obscuring rules work, he's actually really easy to protect. So I think those couple like changes just make him a very consistent option. And frankly, I love seeing a flying Hive Tyrant leading the army. And it's not like Hive Tyrant spam. It's just you got one, he's leading the army. Like it feels thematic. And honestly, this whole list feels really thematic to Tyranids. And I know that's one of the reasons why it is kind of getting popular and a lot of people love it, because a lot of people love Tyranids and we have a true Tyranids list. But with that, was there I'd say like another just little tech, or like I noticed for instance the Termagants are Kraken, not Chronos. Is there any specific reason for that? Just it worked out in list building, or is there a tech you like, maybe because they have assault weapons, getting that advance if you start them on the table? Is there anything like that that maybe it doesn't feel like it's in the right place, but it is, and here's why?
Yeah, so Kronos is generally like the shooty hive fleet, but you have to hold still or have a spell cast on you to get the benefit of that. Frankly, the Termagants were never going to be the recipient of that anyway. So I made them Krakens because I have more synapse with Kraken, and the Kraken synapse wants to go upfield. And then I almost always reserve them because 30 of them is power level 9, so just 1 CP, chuck them in reserve. They can outflank and shoot pretty easy. They've got 18-inch guns, and if I need to, I can 1 CP slap them and near the Lictor instead. He works as a teleport homer for 1 command point, where they arrive within 6 of him and wholly more than 9 from the enemy. But you can do that at the same turn that the Lictor arrives. So it's very easy to, all right, they're outflanking. Okay, you screened the sides, Lictor in the center, Termagants follow. I'm still shooting. And they're also Kraken because nothing, Tyranids don't really fall back and shoot. So it's a lot of people will try to just tag the Termagants, and they can't fall back and shoot, but they can fall back and charge. And you can very, very quickly move upfield that way. Just by like, if people just tag you, you just pile and consolidate, get 6 inches of movement, fall back 6, charge 2d6, pile in 3, consolidate 3. Like, it's just nice to have those options more than if I hold still, I reroll ones to hit. That's not very dynamic. And for big units, I really want it to be dynamic. So I am gonna go through my games a little bit. Round one, as Will mentioned, I ended up playing a guard player with a Castellan. I was actually kind of joking because Demacarons are 18 wounds. They can just be seen on any terrain piece. Like they're pretty much always seen. And honestly, I was like joking, like, because I saw there's actually 2 Castellans at the tournament. Like, I'm going to go second against a Castellan round one and just lose like a Demacaron and be sad. And sure enough, I did play against a Castellan round one somehow, and I actually went first. And that just ended the game, if I'm being honest. I moved the Demacaron up. I moved one up just 12, and the other one up the full distance, and with an advance. I'm like, all right, let me see if I pass onslaught. If not, I'll have the Swarmlord double move the guy who didn't advance, and then he'll get a decent charge. So I passed it, and then I shot a lot of stuff into the guardsmen around the Castellan, killed enough of them to leave a Demacaron-sized hole, double moved the Demacaron into the hole, charged the Castellan. He overwatched, didn't completely kill me, and I fought twice and did like 36 damage to Castellan and just threw him off the table. And that was like an immediate just bad, because I just started tagging things. It was an immediate bad. I started tagging things. He tried to kill the Demacaron in his lines with his whole army, and it was a bunch of random. As Will mentioned, it was a bunch of random upgrades. Like everyone had a Voxcaster, everyone had a sniper rifle, a plasma gun, like power fist on the start, like all kinds of weird. Like there must have been like 200 to 300 points in floating upgrades that did not help kill Demacarons, and the Demacaron survived. And then the second one hit, and then the first one fell back, charged, hit, and I kept shooting. It very quickly led to a high scoring game. I don't remember what the exact score was. He got some primary points because I was mostly concerned with scoring my own points while limiting, his ability to catch me. So I would just, remove all of his screening units, and I didn't care if I left the mortar squad on objective because there was no universe where he was going to beat me on secondaries. And as long as I'm scoring my primaries, I don't worry about his. So I just obliterated his ability to score secondaries and got my own and just called it a day. Because like he took like raise the banners, and I just turned one, put a model on every objective, and we just did that 5 turns, and he never raised a banner, and it worked out pretty well. After that, I ended up playing into Iron Hands, and this is an interesting one. I'm paying for my sins here. I played into an Iron Hand Leviathan. Apparently those are still a thing. Someone thought those were good at one point.
Paying for your sins, that's a good one.
I actually went second against this darn Iron Hand Leviathan, And
Oh no.
with the recent update, with the recent update, the storm cannon is 36 inches of range. And so, very simple, it moves 8, shoots 36. I literally cannot deploy out of range of it. He had more drops than me, so it deployed on the line opposite of D. McCarran. It's like, okay, let's see what happens. Well, it did 24 damage to a D. McCarran turn 1, so he just died. And I was like, oh, this is terrible. And and then he like killed like a front squad of like 10 gaunts that I'd put out there, like, and if I go first, I got an early fast screen, but whatever, 10 gaunts doesn't matter. But the big thing was that he had this big brick of Terminators with Thunderhammer and Storm Shield, and a Librarian. I'm aware of what the Iron Hand spells are. I just didn't really think of how it was going to interact. So turn 1, the stupid Terminators roll a 6 to advance, go 11 inches directly towards my Hive Guard, and a bunch of them touch cover, and he casts Psi Steel Armor on them for +1 save. So they now have a negative 1-up armor save. Yeah, negative 1-up armor save and cover. And I'm just like, and there's a Calexis in front of them. And I'm like looking at my army, and like I scoop Terminators usually. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, all right, I've got AP3, AP2 ignores cover, and closest unit takes mortal wounds. And there's a Calexis in front of this like 10-man Terminator brick with Thunderhammer, Storm Shield, cover, and +1 save. I was like, I literally can't interact with this. This is fantastic. So I launch the other Demon Karen over the line, go hit the Leviathan. Iron Hands can still overwatch on 4s for 1 command point, which, like, again, I know, but it's like there just wasn't a plan B. So we just did it. I gave a catalyst. He took 10 wounds going in. So he degraded the 1 Demon Karen that was left, like, in the motion of Overwatch. And fortunately, D. McCarran's hit incredibly hard, so I picked the Leviathan up and threw it off the table again. And then I used Overrun, which is the stratagem to, after I kill something, I get to move in advance. And instead of consolidating, and I just ran directly into his backfield behind the Terminator unit, like well behind the Terminator unit. And also with my shooting, I killed like a multi-melt attack bike squad because, well, I wasn't going to shoot the Terminators. So that was all fine and good. He ended up bringing an Inceptor squad in his own backfield, which was the last of his reserves, which was really important, and nuked the Demon Karen, but it meant that I knew where his Inceptors were, and they weren't in my army. So I kind of, move blocked with Gaunts the Terminators for a turn or two. He ate them turn after turn, got a bunch of the moments in the process. But I kept him off me for a little bit. And then I just kind of spread the board and started hitting all the objectives. The Swarm Lord was, the Swarm Lord and the Hive Tyrant just went straight up the side because, once the Demon Karens are gone, I don't need to do anything. And they just stayed 17 inches away from this stupid Terminator brick because I just had absolutely no interest in ever getting charged by the thing. Because if you ever got the extra movement, I was just straight up going to lose. And like it was actually really hard because at the end of battle round 3, the primary was 25-5 in his favor. And I was like, oh, this sucks.
Damn, he was really making you sweat, huh?
To dig out of.
Yeah, like I really like wasn't prepared for like round 2 Iron Hand Leviathan to like actually be like a secret counter. Fortunately, the Devagons came in from reserve on turn 3. I used them to clear off a tactical Marine squad that was holding a backfield objective and wasn't in cover. And I used the Lictor to bring them in his own deployment zone turn 2. And then on turn 3, my turn 3, I used Kraken stuff. Like literally, he came in, charged me with infiltrators because he didn't have any guns there to kill me. So we just like charge him with infiltrators, killed like 5, don't care. I pile in, consolidate, fall back 6, charge, get 2d6, pile in, consolidate, start tagging every objective, and he doesn't score a primary point for the rest of the game, and I get 15-15. So we end up getting the primary to a 35-25. I get my scramblers. I got decent engaged on all fronts. I took assassinate, kill every one of his characters, because I ended up just doing like the Hive Tyrant would the Swarm Lord literally pre-measured to be far enough away from the Inceptors that he couldn't shoot me even if he rolled a 6 on the advance. I put myself 0.1 inches beyond that spot. When they came up anyway to deal with the Termagants that had just flooded his objective because he had nothing else that could do it. And then the Swarm Lord went from you literally cannot shoot me to I am touching you. And I killed his Chapter Master and consolidated into the Inceptors. He fell back, didn't do anything. I smite charge. I'm flat 3. Even though he has a 6 of Feel Pain, I still cut a decent number of them down. Tagged them again, did the same thing. And his Terminators that just ran so deep into my lines immediately just left his backfield exposed. And all of my power units went right around while the Hive Guard just sat there quaking. And the Hive Guard got run over eventually, but it didn't matter. And when he finally did, I just like double advanced like one Termagant and just tagged the objective. And was like, boop, it's mine now. So it was an interesting game, not at all what I expected, but it was fun, and it was a very interesting game. Round 3 was when it got really very real, where I played against Mr. Nick Nanavati, who's obviously my roommate and road trip companion for this one. That was a very good game. The Death Guard versus Tyranids is normally pretty tilted in favor of Tyranids, and Nick kind of knows it. Unfortunately, we played on direct assault, which gave him a third secondary. That was very easy, and I was a little bit leery of like Nick going first and just blobbing it with Terminators if I took direct assault. So I actually didn't take direct assault, and then of course he took grind them down, and then I went first, and he had bottom of turn with grind them down and direct assault and domination. And I was like, this is the worst possible reality right now. It ended up being a really close game. We actually both made one uncharacteristic mistake with our movement that cost us both pretty dearly, where frankly I thought I had lost the game because I gave him a Ripper squad to charge at that I didn't need to, and he was able to get his Terminators a lot farther upfield than I had hoped. And then he made some mistakes with his pylon, with not falling back unit, because I kind of did the math and I realized I was going to lose by 1. I did the math at the beginning of my turn 4, and I was like, okay, well, we're going in, and sorry, that was that was the beginning of my turn 4, I think, and I ended up charging the Demon Karen and the Swarmlord in to go deal with his Terminator bomb that was on the center objective now, because I needed my domination. I needed to deny him some primary. And the Swarmlord snake-eyed failed the charge, and then snake-eyed on the reroll a 5-inch charge. And so it was just a Demon Karen going after the Terminators, and he didn't get it done. And Nick decided to put all his guns into the Swarmlord, all his mortal wounds into the Demon Karen, and then countercharge the Demon Karen. And he left the Terminators in combat so that he had more combat to finish the Demon Karen if he didn't get it done before. And literally his first Dreadnought did 8 mortal wounds to the Swarmlord and scooped him up.
And dude, those Dreadnoughts are no joke.
They are just no joke. And then he had another Dreadnought and a Plague Burst Crawler just staring down a Demon Karen that was touching 2 Terminators. And it's just like, oh, well, I guess you got to finish me in combat because we're still touching. And he didn't. He did his mortal wound. He did 2 smites. He did the Plague Skull of Gothilla and charged me with a Demon Prince who's flat damage 3. But and this was also the turn that I had failed my Catalyst. My turn 4 sucked, quite frankly, and I thought that it lost me the game. And then Demon Karen lived, and he killed the entire Terminator unit by himself at that point. With 0 command points left, he just picked it up and threw it. And that Demon Karen was the guy who heals. So every time he kills a model, he gets a wound back. And also, even though I just lost my Catalyst with Swarmlord because I killed the model with his little chest burst mortal wounds, which I used to finish off the squad, I got a Feel No Pain out of that. And suddenly my my mid-tier 4-5 wound Demon Karen became an 8 wound Demon Karen that had a Feel No Pain, and he fell back from the Demon Prince. An Exocrine soloed the Demon Prince because Exocrines are god tier, and the Hive Guard blew up a Contemptor Dreadnought that had stepped out to shoot the Swarmlord. The Hive Tyrant hopped the wall, charged the Plague Burst Crawler, tagged a Contemptor Dreadnought for the bargain, so tagged his 2 surviving shooting units. The Demon Karen charged another character and ate it, and I ended up flipping, because the Demon Karen survived and killed the Terminators, I ended up flipping Grind Them Down that turn, his Domination that turn, and his Direct Assault that turn. So I flipped all 3 of his secondaries and cost him 9 points, and I won by 7.
God damn, that's good.
It was just like, it was Demon Karen just put the whole game on his back, and it's just one of those things where like Nick was like playing conservative to make sure that everything happens. So, like he was like, all right, I'm just going to commit all of my guns to the Swarmlord in case he makes a bunch of saves, and then he just god tiered him off the board like in like half a second, and then he didn't have a backup plans for the guns, so the Demon Karen just kind of lived. I think if he falls the Terminators back and gets to shoot the Demon Karen before he has to charge in, he probably does enough damage to kill it, like statistically. And that was a big mistake. It was a really weird game. We both had some really like swingy moments where like turn 1 I committed a Demon Karen and charged Death Shrouds, and he made every single invulnerable save. and I was just like, well, that's a thing that happens. But it was a really, really good close game. So I was happy to have it. Round 4 after that, I played into the famous rack spam that the Miami meta, Tim specifically has been complaining about forever. This tournament did allow 20-man rack squads. They're 8 points per model. Profits of flesh given before Benvuln. I was kind of expecting this one to be like really hard for me to deal with, and it straight up was not. This was a game where unfortunately I had to go first because I won the roll off, but I was very well hidden. He had 2 Lynx and 3 Hornets, which are forge-rolled Eldar vehicles that shoot decently hard, but are all mostly solid shots. There's not a ton of way to fire from them. And I just hid, and Hiveguard killed 1 Hornet turn 1, and everything else hit. He didn't really do anything on his turn 1. Turn 2, he tried to Prophets of Flesh redeploy and hit a 9-inch charge. I kind of used some craters to very much limit where he could land and just a lot of pre-measuring. Ended up making it so that the only thing he could charge was a D McCarran, and then he would have to consolidate onto an objective, but he would have to charge the D McCarran to actually get anywhere. And I was like, you know what, if he goes for it, I'm going to get some free racks out of it, so it'll be a smaller squad for me to have to next time. He failed to charge. It was a 9-inch rerollable, so that just happens. And I was like, well, there's a rack squad right in front of me that's not next to a homunculus. Let's just go for a double kill. So I pushed his center really hard, and I did smite, scream, so 43 mortal wounds, double tapped an Exocrine, double tapped Hiveguard, and then moved a Demon Karen to the last pocket of survivors, and finished out a rack squad there on the dot. And I still had room for a fight twice if I needed it. So I killed 120 men in the center, and tagged his home objective that they were defending. And then the 20 man that had come towards my lines, I used the Lictor to deploy the Termagants, kind of sheltered behind a ruin, but all within 18 of this big 20 man rack squad that was toughness 4 because there wasn't a homunculus there. And I used my double shoot here, not on the Hiveguard, I'm sorry. I put 180 shots from the Termagants into them and killed 19 out of 20, and the second D McCarran charged the last guy and ate him for breakfast. And very, very quickly, it was just like, oops, I just ate 40 racks, touched one of your units, like touched a rack squad so that they had to spend 2 CP to fall back and do anything, and took his primary to a 5. And, got all my engagement off France points. And then he swung for the fences. He tried to kill a D McCarran and ignored the gaunts. And he got one guy down to 3 wounds, but I was able to. They both had Feel No Pains up, one from Catalyst, one from the Eda guy after with my mortal wounds. And then I used the Chrono spell stratagem to deny Jinx. And he put all his guns into one, did 15 damage to it through the Feel No Pain, and didn't kill a single Gaunt. And then I did the exact same thing, and he was just out of racks, wrapped in combat, and just done. Very quickly, like, when you just sit in front of a Tyranid army and see how much damage they can do, the answer is yes. Like, Tyranids hit insanely hard if you just take it on the chin. And racks are designed to take it on the chin efficiently, and you just, if you try to be the toughest nail, you're eventually going to find a hammer that's too big for you.
Now, Lennon, I remember you saying, did you not lose a single model in that game?
That is true. He tried to go
Wait,
after.
what?
Yeah, he didn't kill a single model. Make sure to make fun of him for that. He tried very hard to kill the D McCarrans, and he ignored all the gaunts to do so, and he never got one down. And by the time that was in question, there was no longer, like, by the time he could have just gone after gaunts, like, he had nothing left, and the game was just so over. Like, he got 5 primary, and that was all that I let him have. And then he got a couple engaged in all friends points, but he didn't get a single model in that game, which is a Tyranid player is like the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me.
So there you go. Game 5.
Game 5 is against good old Dark Angel Dan, who's he's been on the podcast a couple times. It's Dan Monsalve, our buddy on Brohammer. Wonderful guy. Unfortunately, it was Vital Intelligence. He was playing a Dark Angel build very similar to my own, so I knew exactly what it did. And it was a big Terminator brick, 9 attack bikes, 2 Talonmasters, Azrael, Ezekiel, an Infiltrator squads, some Terminator command squads. Like, I know exactly what this list does because I play it, essentially. I think the only difference is that I do 1 less multi-melta for a heavy bolter on every attack bike squad, and then I drop the Infiltrators for 1 more command squad and an extra server unit. And other than that, it's literally the same army. So with Vital Intelligence, it's super spread out objectives all over the darn place. When you hold them and then leave, they're still yours. And the faster army wins Vital Intelligence 99.5% of the time. I went first, threw Gaunt squads onto a bunch of different objectives hiding behind walls, and he just didn't get to kill them all. And then it was a very simple, like, all right, well, I'm going to leave now and go back behind the wall, but these are still my objectives. Go ahead and try to take them from me if you want. And he couldn't. And we spent a couple turns staring at each other where I was just getting 15s on primaries and he was getting 5s. And eventually he's like, well, it's very simple. Like, if he doesn't do anything, he's going to lose. So he tried to make a move, for the center, like see how much a Terminator unit could kill or could survive. I'd been kind of tapping him with Hive Guard, and I got the 10-man unit. I actually killed 2 of them because I flew the Hive Tyrant forward, Smite, Scream. The Swarm Lord uses his slingshot to grab the Hive Tyrant and put him back behind the wall. So it's just a chip 2d3 mortals every turn. So I did that and shot them with Hive Guard, and I killed 1 in the sighting phase, 1 in the shooting phase. So only 1 Terminator stood up, of course. So it was just a 9-man instead of a 10-man. So when he pushed the 9-man out on his turn 3, and I went after it, I killed the whole thing. It was Smite, Scream. Execrane took +1 damage. Symbio Storm lit him up. Hive Guard went in, double tapped. I charged the survivors with Hormagaunts and a Demakaran. The Hormagaunts base every single Terminator. The Demakaran gets 0.75 inches away from 1 dude. And now no one's within half an inch of that Terminator within half an inch. So very simple. 1 model gets to swing back on the Demakaran, and I fought twice. And it was just put insane damage into the unit in 1 turn. Tyranids have a 1 CP reroll to wound strat with a monster. So like against Dark Angels, Transhuman, it's annoying, but I'm wounding on 4 rerollable is still getting a good number through. And I just basically picked the entire Terminator brick up and denied him points. And he was able to kill the Hive Tyrant, but that Demakaran went on to kill Ezekiel and Azrael because he tried to countercharge me, and it just wasn't enough. I had gotten a wrap off, and he had used some other command points to get his Raven Wing out of combat when I charged him with some other elements. He did the 2 CP interrupt, 2 CP move, so he spent 4 CP to get a squad out of a wrap before I got to do it. But then he didn't have enough to desperate breakout, and I just ate the rest of his army at that point, and he was just never able to claw back on the primaries, even though he ended up killing some of the stuff I threw in his face. It was way too little too late. I never let him score points on primary, frankly. I think he got 5-5-0-0, and I got 15-15-15 and didn't even score my turn 5. So that ended up giving me the tournament, which is always nice. Loved getting the Tyranids out there because honestly, they felt so strong. So it was really wonderful to actually have Tyranids be good, because that is something we have not had in a hot minute.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I literally just fought that list yesterday, kind of in prep of this, just so I could see some of the inner workings. And like, holy crap! Like, I was like, I understood what it did, but once you actually see it on the table and how it functions, that it is a well-oiled machine that plays the missions perfectly. It has multiple threats to deal damage. Like, it feels to me like the epitome of a 9th edition list, and I love that it has that, and it's still, again, I said this earlier, it feels like a true Tyranids list. Like, it matches the fluff and it kicks ass. So it's like one of the best lists just ever for that reason. I know we've run super long on this one. Did we want to dive in a little deeper and cover some of the plans for the future, what you're doing with the list? Do you feel like it's something where people familiar with Tyranids could pick it up and play it? Is there like an easier version? Is there anything like that we want to cover, or should we save that for like part 2 that we could do later?
I think we could go pretty deep on Tyranids another time. We've definitely definitely been through it a lot, but Florida Man 40k is always secretly a Tyranid podcast, so we will definitely be back to talk about them. I guess the very quick thing would be that if you played Kraken Gene Stealers, this is just Kraken Gene Stealers with Demakarans instead of Gene Stealers, because Demakarans are much better in the current meta. So if you played that, you can probably pick it up, but it's about as hard to play, and Tyranids are always a little bit difficult, but then very rewarding when you actually get all their stuff together.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I could go on. I've been saying that all episode, but we're at almost 2 hours, so we'll save the rest for part 2. When that comes around, maybe we can get a special guest who is also passionate about Tyranids. Listeners of the show know who exactly. Long-term listeners of the show, I should say, know exactly who I'm talking about. But with all that, let's just cut it off now. And thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be back with more Tyranid talk later.
Bye for now.